ability to do that, stimulate the nerve, okay? And so what ends up happening is that you will get probably a lower area here where, because of the refractory period, okay? So, has anybody ever done this before? Where they've measured a twitch? Okay? So, we have done this not because we're great. As a graduate student, we thought this would be cool to see if this actually was the case. So we have downstairs in the laboratory, we have a device that has a electrode that looks like this. It's a pencil electrode, and you can actually put it on a nerve and send electrical signal to stimulate the muscle fiber, okay? And so, and you can do it at the same intensity at a different rate, or we're going to look at this again, or you can increase the intensity of it and look at it as well. And so, and then what you want to look at is to see that the physiology is true, which it is true. I don't want to kid you there. But then you want to see, Carmen, who's the toughest? Who can do the most stimulation? Who can do the highest stimulation? That's what graduate students want to know. They want to know who the toughest graduate student is.
Does it actually measure the response of the muscle?
So we were actually measuring it with a kinematic device, a KinCom. So we were doing actually kicking with our lower legs with a TENS unit is basically what we were doing, and to see what that would look like as you apply different speed of stimuli and then different intensity of stimuli. So the speed of stimuli works fine. That's really not a toughness factor for graduate students. The intensity of the stimuli, that's where you start to the proverbial boys to men philosophy, because we're all male graduate students that would do it. You want to do it? You want to go do it right now after class? Okay. Right now? I don't think you do, Carmen. So it'll kill you. So and you end up with muscle soreness because you're stimulating too fast. Okay. So simple twitch, summation, and tetanus with the increasing stimuli. Important muscle characteristics. Okay. Anybody ever had tetanus of the muscle? You're going to say a cramp.
You mean tetanus the disease?
Not tetanus the disease, but tetanus the disease is named after that. Why?
Because you get tetanus.
Because you get maximal muscle contractions that you can't relax. So yeah, that's a bacteria causes that. It's not good. What was tetanus called before as a general term? Does anybody know what it's called? Lockjaw. So basically what happens is your muscles, these muscles contract and you can't, they won't relax.
Before lockjaw?
I don't know if it was tetanus before lockjaw. I thought it was lockjaw.
It's
It's probably the same. Lockjaw is probably talked about with people that don't understand tetanus. Like my family wouldn't go, if I said, oh, you got tetanus, and they go, oh, you got the lockjaw. So you have to work with the people that you're working with. So, yeah, I'm a redneck from Wyoming, okay? So, same figure. I like this one a little better just because it has the stimuli with the milliseconds on it, okay? As opposed to this one, which doesn't have it. But this one shows summation better, I think, in regards to this figure. I think this figure is from your textbook. The other thing I like about this one is it identifies peak tension for one stimulus, one twitch, so that you can actually see the summation here in this one. But this will, if you provide continual stimulation, you'll get a constant contraction of a relative tension. So nice figure, okay? So this is the one we did as graduate students. So now you'll notice that we have force again on the y-axis, and then you have the increasing stimulus strength at this point, okay? So now we're not changing the speed of the stimuli, we're increasing the intensity of the stimuli, okay? And so each one of these bars is a higher electrical shock to the nerve to get contraction, okay? So at some point, no matter how much stimulus that you give, you have again reached the maximal response of that muscle to produce force, okay? We are not supermen, okay? We can't all of a sudden give you a maximal force out here and you get something like a bar that looks like this. If that was the case, you guys be tasering people all over the place to get maximal responses, okay? So you've reached the structural and functional limits of the muscle to produce force in this area, that no matter how much you increase after that, it's not gonna have any increase in force production. So this is where you start to see who can withstand these forces right here when you're measuring them. Takes a pretty stout person to do that, Carmen.
Is that more about a safety protocol for our muscles than anything else?
This one here.
Yeah.
So you just, at some point, we're gonna talk about this, no matter how much you get, you're only gonna have a certain amount of myosin heads that can bind to actin and produce that force. So you're not gonna be able to get more myosin heads to do it. You've maxed out your ability to generate tension, so.
Grip your muscles.
Yeah, so it's related to probably more the structural component that it is related to anything else, because you're maxing the system out. But some people, Carmen, will say this really is bothersome here, so they quit during a wall sit, let's say. You're down here and Austin was down up here.
I think I was a little bit further.
Oh, you think maybe you were here?
No. Yeah.
Here?
Yeah.
Do you think you were here?
Yeah, because I don't think that, like,
That's probably number two.
I think he would have, like, was close to dropping anyways, and he just dropped because I dropped. Like, if you would have kept going.
You don't think he could have
would've
pushed
lost it.
you? Well, we never know.
That's what I'm saying. I was like way down on this. I could keep
Okay.
going for.
He said he was here.
Okay.
He said he's still
Okay.
intimidating me, Carmen.
Okay, bye.
The rematch. He's wanting the rematch, but he's saying that you were here. This is nice. This is some trash talking going on here. So what he's saying, Carmen, is you were here. You couldn't go any farther. You were maxed
I
out.
was like
And
down
he
You guys changed your mind?
No, I was like,
you're over here.
no.
Right here.
No, the blue one,
You're right here.
and then one more to the left.
Right here.
Yeah, that was me.
Okay. Where was he?
Um,
He's saying he's here.
I'd say he was like,
Right there.
maybe like 2 down from me.
So you're saying he was here.
Yeah.
I still think he wins now based upon where you think he's at. He's winning again.
I
What
mean,
you wanna
but
say, Carmen?
He's trying to say that, like.
Carmen, what you want to say is he was here and you were here. You had tons to go.
I know, but I like dropped, so I'm being like.
Did you drop though because of physiology?
I did bar the day before and I was kind of sore, and that's why I think I didn't win.
That worked
If
out.
we're being honest.
Did bar? What's that?
Like bar class, like take a workout.
They're rough.
That was hard.
I thought it was that you went to the bar.
No.
You're like our friend over here. Boozing. Yeah.
She's down in Miami the day before.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I went to home bar on whatever night that home bar works. Don't kid us, we know what goes on here in these things. So force regulation in muscle, type and number of motor units recruited. We've already talked about this, size principle. So if you recruit more motor units, greater force. If you recruit fast motor units, greater force, okay? And a motor unit is what?
Motor neuron and muscle fibers and innervates.
That's correct. Motor neuron and muscle fibers, it innervates. Okay? So, orderly recruitment, we know what this is, the size principle. Again, revisiting motor unit recruitment. Smallest motor units recruited first, slow twitch, low force, fatigue resistant fibers. Okay? Mid-sized are the type 2A motor units. Okay? Fast twitch, moderate force, fatigue resistant muscle fibers. And then finally, largest motor units recruited last. Fast twitch, high force, fast fatigue. Always the same order each time. Okay? Does not change. No matter what activity you're doing, you're always going to recruit them in this order. It's economical. You want to recruit the fibers that can just do the workload that you're doing. If you can't, you recruit the next set. If that doesn't do it, then you recruit the next set. Okay? There's no reason for us to start out here with every activity, is there? Okay? Do we need We go back to this slide. Greater force every time we contract. No. Do we need it fast? No. Okay, so we want to be efficient in how we're using our energy, and the size principle allows us to do that. Okay, so the other thing it does is it allows us to, when we say economical, meet the demands of the task. So we don't want to use more energy. Okay, conserve ATP is what we want to do, right? We don't have to use it. We don't want to use it. Okay, so when you're in your car, do you guys have a the gear below drive, that is the speed gear or anything like that, Carmen? Or you have a car that you can switch it to performance? You have that car? Exactly. So are you constantly driving around in performance mode? Why? Because you're not good at working them.
It's odd, like it switches on its own. Like, I feel like
Gears?
I'm always messing it up. Yeah, like if you put it in sport mode, and then you have like,
You have to shift on your own, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
but like, I don't know.
When you're in sport mode, usually your car is conserving, or it's using more gas because you're trying to go fast or you're trying to impress people. So that's what you do in sport mode is you go really fast on the service road in your V6 Honda Accord, and then the guy for University Park Police is sitting down here by the George Bush Library with his gun around the wall, which isn't unfair at all. And so if you guys ever see that guy on a trip on your bike or your foot with their into there, I want you to go back there and tell him, just stand in front of him and wave people down so that they don't get tickets. And so I think that's cheating, is when you're hidden behind the wall and no one can see you. I'm going to speed, but if I see you, we have an advantage, whereas I think that's entrapment. But again, that's probably me soapboxing here as opposed to some legal issues. So, but you don't want to be in sport mode all the time, right? We're be cruising down the highway going home to Miami. Even though that's not where you're from, we're just going to say you're going to Miami to do bar exercises. Do you want to be in sport mode the whole time going, no, you want to be in the old economical mode so that you can do that, okay? Again, all these things we've talked about. More force in type 2 motor units, less force in type 1 slow twitch. Fewer smaller fibers versus more larger fibers. You would have guessed that. If you have less force production, you're probably going to have less fibers, and they're probably going to be smaller based upon their ability to contract. Okay. We talked a little bit about these already, twitch summation. Okay. So types of motor units, Chris. Why is that the same thing? So here we go. So take a look at this. The top diagram you've seen before. Seen it 1,000 times in the previous slides that we had before. But now the panel B, I think, is the one that we don't appreciate, and you do see it in the videos. But look at the arrangement of now this cross-sectional of those myofibrils. Okay? So what in this picture is the pink or the red? That's the what? Really?
Well,
If that's the case, if that's the case,
because it's bigger.
would it be actin then? So which one's bigger? Let's go back up here. Which one do you say is a bigger fiber?
Myosin.
It's myosin, exactly. So now if you go down to here, each red or pink dot is a myosin fibril. And what is the blue then? Actin. And so look at the spatial arrangement of that now. It's in a hexagon, okay? And what's great about that now is you can have one myofibril or myosin interacting with 6 actin filaments, okay? So that's a lot of points of contact that you can generate force now. It's a great design. The other thing is now you have an adjacent myosin that can also do, my pen keeps losing power, kitties, is that it will have 6 points of contact, okay? And so you can see how you can generate force and high forces based upon this structural arrangement of myosin and actin, okay? So you're gonna have tons of contact points with those actin filaments that you spatially don't see in the 3D arena, okay?
Do they have 6 heads as well?
Yeah, so if you go back to that video, you see all those heads moving around? So, again, the 6 heads may be not in the same area, but if you think about that video that we saw, you saw that 3-dimensional shape of all those myosin heads going down those actin filaments, and so you'll have, each of those will have the ability to interact with 6 actin filaments as you do that. So, going to be able to generate lots of force with each of those heads on each of those actins, and the fact that there is, like this one is going to be interacting with these two, and then the other one is going to be interacting with these two, you get 2 myosin filaments that are acting upon 2 actin filaments. So again, it allows you to generate a great deal of tension. This is great from a structural standpoint. Engineers would look at this and go, you've done a very nice job of setting this up, okay? If this was your intent, was to do this is with that. So think about that if there was less actin, if you only had one of them, and then you had, let's say there was a hexagon here, and there was a hexagon here, and they didn't interact with each other, okay? You're now missing the opportunity to interact here, and that is going to impact your ability to generate tension or force in that muscle fiber, okay? So, beautiful, and I think, again, you miss that in relationship to the pictures that you see. You always see this one. Everybody sees this one, okay? But now when you flip it on its end and you're looking down longitudinally, you get to see a different spatial representation of the actin and myosin. You start to appreciate really what's going on. The video does that, I think, as well. You get to see that from a different perspective in regards to how they're arranged, okay? And ultimately, this is going to affect this. And this is what I've been telling you guys about, okay? So let's look at this. This is an intimidating figure, so let's just start with the top of it, okay? And so what you see is relative tension on the y-axis, going up from 0 to 1. And then the x-axis is a percent of the resting length of, in this case, we're probably talking about a sarcomere, okay? So we're going up to a 60% of its resting length, all the way up to 160% of its resting length. So the 160 obviously is we're stretching it out, 60 is we're contracting. So what do you notice about that top figure?
Strongest at 120.
Yeah, so the strongest peak tension that you get is typically about 80 to 120% resting length, okay? Why?
And those cross ridges are direct properties too.
So Austin says cross-bridge interactions, that's what you said? What did you say, Noah?
I said the muscles have elastic properties.
There's some elastic properties in there, okay? So now, so we've just decided that the optimal length is about 80 to 120% rest, right? Anytime that you deviate from that, go lower than 80, relative tension is going to drop precipitously. Equally, if you go above 120 and stretch the muscle farther out, tension is going to drop precipitously. Okay, let's see why. So if you were to look at this, this would tell you why. Okay? Let's look at the optimal one, which is about 2.25 micrometers, which is up there on this. It's on the high side, the 120% resting length. You can see you have myosin heads that are interacting with actin, okay? So you're maximizing those cross-bridge interactions between 80 and 120% of the length of the sarcomere. Now if we go to the right and we come into this area here, 120 above, so 120, 140, 60, you can see the reason that you have a precipitous drop in your relative tension is because now, look, you are limiting the amount of cross-bridge interactions. So the myosin heads, because you stretch that sarcomere out at 3.65 micrometers, so we're actually right here, where tension is 0, because now you've stretched that muscle that the myosin heads can't even bind to actin. You can't generate tension without the binding of actin to the myosin heads to actin. And so what we've done is we've stretched that so there's no interaction. And appropriately, there's 0 amount of tension in that muscle, okay? So now if we look at the other end of the spectrum, going down where we're contracting it to, let's say, 60% of its length, and here we're at 165, okay? So we're actually talking about this right here, which is a little lower than the relative tension. But what happens at 165 is, what do you guys notice?
Overlap.
Okay?
It reaches the lines.
You're exactly right. So structurally, what's happened? We have now brought the muscle to where it structurally can't contract anymore. Okay? And so what is that going to do to the cross-bridge interactions? Okay? You're going to have fewer cross-bridge interactions, reduced tension development. Okay? Because there's an overlap in there, some of those myosin heads aren't going to be able to react with that. And so you see that here. These ones here now aren't interacting with actin. Why? Because of that overlap structurally puts them in a position that they can't. Okay? You've reached the structural limits of the muscle to contract, which is going to affect the amount of tension that you can generate. Here, we had no cross bridges equals no tension development. And in this 80 to 120 area, what you're doing is maximizing the ability for myosin to interact with actin. So you have maximal cross-bridge interactions equals this maximal tension development. Okay? So they call this the length-tension relationship in skeletal muscle. If you shorten the muscle up too short, it's going to decrease your ability to produce tension. If you stretch it too far, you want to keep it right in a nice wheelhouse of 80 to 120% of the resting length so that you maximize cross-bridge interactions. Okay? Beautiful, awesome, okay? Really like this figure, really explains this in a great detail, I think, showing you those cross-bridge interactions and where there is a lack of cross-bridge interaction, specifically on both ends of this spectrum, to see how that impacts tension, okay? Questions about that? Anybody got anything? I think that's pretty self-explanatory, don't you? Did you think about muscle contractions that way?
Well, how far would you have to be stretched to be like past 160? Like, 'cause obviously you can still contract if you're not stretched as
Yeah,
much.
so the question is, that's the question is, I think a better question is when are you in trouble? If you had 0 cross-bridge interactions here at, let's say that looks like about 180, correct? Is that really feasible for you to do?
Yeah, is it just like in a lab where they
Yeah,
like pull them
I
apart?
think so. So I think that is, this would be non-physiological, unless you were ripping limbs from individuals, okay? And so sometimes that's a great point, is you have to go, oh, that's awesome that they're having no cross-bridge interactions. But think about that in real life, when does that happen? So you'd have to do what to your elbow in order for you to have 0 cross-bridge interactions in your bicep? You'd have to have serious hyperextension where potentially you've broken a bone structurally that would allow, or tore ligaments, tendons for your, to get in that position where you can do that. So I would say yes, that this is probably a laboratory-based demonstration to show that, because if you were to do that in a intact, structurally intact individual, it would be problematic.
This is a Nazi contribution.
So I wouldn't say that this is a Nazi contribution. Why? Because you can't use Nazi contributions. It's illegal for us to even present that. So this is probably an isolated muscle where you can actually take the muscle belly out and then stretch just the muscle beyond its capacity. So I would say that this is probably an animal model that this was done in, and not a human model. So it would be it wouldn't be in vivo, it would be in vitro. Okay. So Dr. Murphy would be able to do something like this at Murphy. Or you guys may have done it with has anybody ever done a frog muscle prep? They'd be able to do that in high school. We're getting to the point where people don't want to do these studies anymore with you guys because it harms the animals. So are you missing out on some understandings of great physiology? Yeah. So then can we do it with videos or modeling it? Sure, you can do it. It gets really exciting when you see it firsthand and you're seeing the muscle and you get to touch the muscle and things like that. The problem with that is the people don't want the headache of working with animals, and then there's a larger percentage of the population, I think, that feel like it's is it worth it, the risk to benefit ratio? Are you guys killing frogs? Is it worth it to learn about this if we can do it in other ways? Kind of on the fence on that because I'm a scientist, and some of the coolest stuff that you see is using live tissue. So yeah, but I don't disvalue or unvalue other people's opinions about animal research. I have a dog, and I like her. Would I do research on her? No. But I will tell you that I saved her from the pound, and so we have an agreement that if she says something really bad and I do kill her, we're all square, because I saved her life to begin with at the pound. Anna, you okay with that? Because I know you're an animal lover.
Sounds good.
It's all good, right? Karma. Now, would I do that? Heck no, because she's my friend. So, and she doesn't like Bunder, which is thunder. So last night, guess where the 85-pound lab was? New, on top of the bed, sleeping with me. And she likes to get into, she likes to be warm, so she will get positioned, and she gets as close as she can to you with her feet, and then just goes, boom, drops down, so it wedges between you and her, so there's physically no space between you and her. That's what she did last night about 2 a.m. Was just like, boom! And she doesn't do it to the wife, because the wife ends up ultimately kicking her. So it's always on my side. Would I do research on her? No. Have I done research on her? Sure. Have I done research on my children? Heck yeah. I sent them to UT Southwestern and got money for it. Same picture, a little different look, but you can see now this gradiates the actin myosin cross bridges instead of giving us just 3 pictures of the overlap. This one gives us 2 extra ones that kind of see how that affects the tension relationship. So I like this one as well to include in there. So the more information you have, the better you have. Okay. So now we're going to talk about fiber types: slow twitch, fast twitch. Okay, based upon some biochemical properties. First of all, any questions on that before we go ahead? You guys good with length tension relationship? You could talk about that in an exam question, Winnie.
Not yet.
There, I just gave you your softball right there. You said, could you make up some exam questions for me and then do that?
Yeah.
Ask her. Maybe it'll be on the test. Then again, maybe it won't. Characteristic of muscle fiber types. Okay, we're going to look at it in different ways. Biochemically, okay, number oxidative capacity, number of capillaries, mitochondria, amount of myoglobin. Okay, why would that be important for oxidative capacity? Give me an answer for each one of those. Number of capillaries, why would that be important? That's exactly right. Blood flow to bring oxygen to the fiber. Mitochondria, okay, responsible for producing ATP aerobically. So if you want a high aerobic capacity, what do you high oxidative capacity? You want a lot of mitochondria. Amount of myoglobin. What does myoglobin do?
Transport oxygen in the muscle.
It transports oxygen in the muscle. What does hemoglobin do?
Transports oxygen in the blood.
Transports oxygen in the blood. So if you want a lot of oxygen, you need a lot of the carrier protein, myoglobin, in a lot of blood vessels, increased number of capillaries, sending it to a lot of powerhouses, mitochondria. Okay? Talked a little bit about myosin ATPase. And again, related to the metabolic demands of those fibers. If you have a slow twitch fiber, your speed of ATP degradation is going to be a little slower than it is for fast twitch fibers. Okay? Abundance of contractile proteins. Okay? So if we're talking about contractile proteins, what are we talking about? Actin and myosin. If you have more actin and more myosin, you're going to be able to produce more tension in your contractions. So your fast twitch fibers are probably going to have a little higher abundance of contractile proteins, but from a biochemical standpoint, going to be different than slow twitch. Okay? Contractile properties. Maximal force production, force per unit of cross-sectional area goes back up to this. Okay? If you have more contractile proteins, you're going to have more ability to produce force. Okay? Speed of contraction, that also goes to this. So this myosin ATPase is going to affect the speed of that contraction, which is going to be biochemically affecting the contractile properties. Okay? Maximal power output, force times shortening velocity, taking these two and now combining into this. And then efficiency is less energy needed to do work. Okay? We're going to talk about all of these characteristics in relationship to slow twitch, type 1, fast fatigue resistant, type 2A, and then the fatigue resistance, type 2X fibers. Okay? So, how do you figure this out? Okay? So, has anybody ever had a muscle biopsy in here? If you were an elite athlete, would you want anybody to take a muscle biopsy? So what is a biopsy? What are you actually doing? Yeah, you're taking tissue out. So if you are, and you're an elite athlete here on campus, correct? You use your skeletal muscle to perform, is that correct? Could we get a chunk of it? Would you be really happy about us taking a chunk of that muscle to examine to see what makes you great? Why? Because you need it. That's exactly right. Okay. So elite athletes are going to be a little less likely to do this because it's an invasive procedure. You can see that this individual is that's their calf muscle, and you can see that that needle is stuck in there quite a bit, right? Okay. So the other thing that you can't see very well, you can just see it here, but at the tip of this needle right here, that hose continues on and is applying suction to that needle. Okay. And inside that needle, you can see there is an opening in the end of it, and there all the sharp part of, see if we can zoom this up, you can see that sharp part right here. This is the sharp area right there. This is a piece of skeletal muscle. What does it look like? It looks like a chunk of steak, right? Why does it look like a chunk of steak? That's what steak is, right? Steak is skeletal muscle from cattle.